Mom, Dad, there's no way that I can express to you what I'm feeling right now. My heart is full to bursting, except to say, I'm the king of the world!
Hello and welcome back to Cameron, King of the World. We have finally reached Pandora, and if you've been following this series at all in any way, shape or form, then you'll know that how we do things here in this series is we talk about the behind the scenes of the film before we get to my thoughts. So this video is going to be the journey to Pandora and Cameron's road to making this huge movie called Avatar, which has been percolating in his mind for many years, and the main kind of bulk of the production of this film took place between 2005 and 2009, but we're going to go back all the way to the 1970s and the real genesis of this film, where his ideas came from and everything else that goes along with the very long story, the very long road to Pandora. Now, there are so many things to talk about when it comes to Avatar, which is why for me it's very handy to split this into two and to do this video talking about the behind the scenes story, the many hurdles that were in the way as they were making this film, and all of the boundaries that Cameron was pushing, as he tends to try and push with almost every film he makes. He's always going into untested waters, no pun intended, or, well, it's not even a pun really, but no joke intended in the untested waters part, but you know, he always wants to push the envelope, and with Avatar it was no different. And you know, it goes back really to the 1970s when he first wrote a screenplay about these blue aliens, and I'm going to go ahead and assume that that really has no real resemblance to what the final film in 2009 Avatar became, but that was kind of the very distant genesis point. And it was a science fiction screenplay that he wrote, I think in 76 or 77, you know, just before Star Wars, really. And he'd been a huge fan of science fiction growing up, and it was like an amalgamation of all that stuff that he loved. And it was about all these different kinds of planets, and the final planet had these blue aliens. And that came, I believe, from a dream that his mother had. His mother had a dream about these 12-foot tall blue alien women. He thought, that's a cool idea. And he kind of held on to that and kept it in the back of his head for a very long time. Then he went and had his career and kind of became the big success that he became. And in the 90s, when he had finished True Lies, and I really don't know the full timeline here because a lot of stuff could be overlapping, especially with James Cameron. When you look at, I mean, there's a whole Wikipedia page dedicated to unrealized James Cameron projects. So I'm not sure when it really first started, but in 1994, he wrote an 80-page treatment for Avatar. So this was him sitting down saying, I'm going to make that science fiction story with the blue aliens, and so let's get pen to paper and see what comes out. And so he was really thinking that Avatar was going to be his next film after True Lies. And we've talked about the Spider-Man film that didn't really come to be around 94, 95, but he really thought, you know, we're going to kind of dive into this. And in August of 1996, he announced that he was going to be looking into making a film with CGI characters. And this was something that was, you know, completely unprecedented at the time in 1996. Now, we've talked about the whole evolution of visual effects and, you know, CGI, computer generated imagery for visual effects, and how he was like really on the forefront of putting those in live action movies with The Abyss in 1989 and then Terminator 2 in 1991. True Lies, I think, had visual effects, but there wasn't anything really like, you know, CGI created in True Lies. That was a more grounded kind of action movie. But you would assume that with Spider-Man, he was looking at using CGI for a lot of that kind of superhero stuff. But in terms of, you know, a fully rendered digital character in a movie, it had just never been done before. And so, you know, it was one of those things where Cameron was really biting off more than he could chew by even thinking that this was possible. He got his visual effects company, Digital Domain, on board and was planning to start the film in 1997 and release it in 1999. But ultimately, the technology was just not there. So he decided to go and do Titanic and, you know, became the king of the world and, you know, had a huge success with that movie. So, you know, a few years after that, I guess, you know, he was probably thinking about Avatar again and thinking that would be the next the next big thing. And around this time was when I first heard about Avatar. So this was probably around 1999, 2000. And in 2000, we'll talk about this a little bit more later on in the series, I should say, domains were registered, website domains, for Battle Angel Alita. And it was reported online that, in fact, it was reported on a website that I now work for, which kind of blows my mind, but that was the website I went to as a kid, was JoeBlow.com, and it was reported that James Cameron was working on Battle Angel Alita and Avatar. Now, I remember reading that very vividly. I remember sitting there as a 11, 12-year-old kid and going, Avatar, a movie about the profile picture you have on forums. Because for me, an avatar was just a little image you had on message boards and stuff in the late 90s. And so I really didn't get a grasp of what that really meant in terms of James Cameron's story, but it seemed like a very boring. I was imagining like a film about geeky kids in school, and like they've got little avatars and they're hiding behind them, like it was, at least like Battle Angel Alita sounded really fucking cool. So I was, thinking, oh, that's interesting. I wonder how that's going to pan out. And then, of course, it was years and years before any real development got moving on Avatar or Battle Angel Alita. And in 2001, Cameron decided to order a kind of visual effects test, a kind of proof of concept piece, a kind of short, like 2-minute film that features a woman and a kind of very Martian looking alien, kind of like the traditional alien that we see in kind of media with the big head, just walking through a cemetery having a conversation. So it's a live action thing, and it's integrating this digital character using, I don't know if they use motion capture, but they definitely had reference video of this actor performing the part of the alien. And so this short film called Brother Termite was kind of the, let's see if this can really work. And it wasn't quite there. You could see some of the pieces coming together, but it just wasn't still quite there yet. So Cameron went off and he made his 3 deep sea exploration documentary films, Expedition Bismarck, Ghost of the Abyss, and Aliens of the Deep. And once that had all wrapped up, I guess he was maybe thinking about it again. And in kind of late 2005, he really started thinking about getting back onto Avatar, and he was really inspired by seeing what other filmmakers had done with CGI characters in the years which he went off and did those documentaries. Because of course in 2002 we had Gollum in The Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers, which was a staggering achievement that still holds up today as just an incredible piece of motion capture, performance, and visual effect. I mean, it's an incredible achievement, and was at the time. I remember it was just like going to see that film in the cinema. I was like, it's like a whole other world. I mean, obviously we'd seen it before with Jar Jar Binks, but that wasn't really a great character. Gollum was a great character, and there was so much nuance to the facial expressions, and you felt like a real true performance was coming out of that. And then they would do the same thing with like King Kong and I forget the characters, Davy Jones in the Pirates of the Caribbean sequel, Bill Nye. So they were really like the visual effects houses are really nailing this, and now bringing these characters to life that looked so completely different than something you could achieve with practical makeup. So the gears start spinning in Cameron's head, and he thinks maybe it's time to pull the trigger on Avatar. And this was known as Project 880 at the time. So around 2000 there was a lot of buzz around this Avatar film, and then the Project 880 thing came up, and then there was the documentary kind of hiatus, and then 2005 Cameron then approached 20th Century Fox. And I think I mentioned earlier in the True Lies video that Cameron, after Terminator 2, had signed this big multi-picture deal with 20th Century Fox. Now, from what I understand, that deal kind of was reneged. I think there was some kind of agreement that it wouldn't continue on the way that they had initially laid it down. So I don't think Cameron was as explicitly tied to work with 20th Century Fox, but he'd worked with them to great success, especially with Titanic, and so he brought Avatar to them and showed them a proof of concept clip, and he got that funded by them as well, and they kind of saw this a very rough version of a scene that is actually in the final film of Avatar. And you watch this proof of concept from 2005, and it's kind of strange. You can see the kind of, again, you can see the kind of the blueprint of where it might go, and it's still a little bit rough around the edges, and they obviously haven't gone like balls to the wall with the texturing and the detail, but it's kind of like can we get the expressions? Can we get the feeling of like an actual human face through this slightly alien creature's, digitally rendered face? So they cast 2 actors who they weren't going to be in the final film. It was just a pure test, a proof of concept. And, Fox agreed to then fund Avatar for a year of research and development because it was going to take them so long to come up with concept art and to look into the designs of the Na'vi creatures, who are the aliens in the film that Cameron had in mind. He needed to get the designs down for that. He became dissatisfied with some of the concept art, not in terms of the designs and how they looked, but in terms of not being able to visualize them in a 3D sense. So he hired a maquette sculptor to actually sculpt these three-dimensional creatures so he could get a real sense of what they would look like and feel like, and can kind of visualize what that Na'vi kind of final design would be in the movie. He then teamed up with Weta Digital, who were really becoming huge around that time, just coming off of Lord of the Rings and King Kong. So he spoke to Weta over in New Zealand, and they agreed to actually wait to see if Avatar would get the green light to go into production. And they had a couple of other offers from big movies, but I guess they kind of saw, as you kind of would, I think, this is James Cameron. The last movie he made, Titanic, was the biggest movie of all time. So I think, it probably stands to their best interest to wait around a little bit and see if this thing panned out. So he's working with Weta Digital, working with all these designers and artists and everything, bringing the world together in a kind of, in a visual sense. But also in 2006, he was also then writing a proper full script to kind of, shape the whole story around and really nail down all of the specifics of the story that he wanted to tell to go along with the visual stuff that was being developed around the time as well. So it was like it was a big pre-production phase that kind of maybe wasn't even pre-production because they hadn't been given a green light. So it was one of those weird things where they had to really just, and Cameron talks about this, that in terms of just being a director, being a filmmaker, you have to fully commit. Like you have to go all in, and it's just this road of going down of making a movie. And other people have said when he makes a movie, it's like he's going to war. So he tackled it full on with this team that he built around him, and they were becoming confident that they could pull this off, but there was still so much that needed to be worked on. The motion capture technology they developed over 2 years between 2005 and 2007. Now, I'm not sure exactly if they pioneered a new way of doing it, because I'm not as familiar with some of the behind the scenes stuff on, say, a movie like King Kong, which is more recent, around this time in 2005. But they certainly spent a very long time, and that's the thing, because I've seen so many behind the scenes documentaries over the past 10 years or so after Avatar. I don't know if they kind of pioneered the kind of virtual camera, which was this device where you have actors on a stage with motion capture suits. And I think maybe it was Cameron's idea to get the cameras onto the suits to fully capture the facial expressions. But again, I've seen that in so many other things. But that might have really come from Avatar. I'm not entirely sure, so I shouldn't say it for sure. She sells seashells on the seashore. So I'm not entirely sure on that one, but because again, I've seen stuff like the behind the scenes of The Last of Us, and they use the kind of camera on the front of the face and stuff. And I don't know, I think it really might be something that was pioneered by Cameron and his team. And then there was the desire from Cameron to make this a 3D movie. And so they actually designed a new 3D camera system that was initially called the Reality Camera System. And then because they wanted it to feel as much like real life as possible, like the effect of seeing this 3D image on the screen with the glasses is more how we see the world around us. And then Cameron later renamed it the Fusion Camera System, which he developed with Vince Pace. So they were really just pioneering technology as they're going along in the motion capture stuff. All while, again, the green light is still not fully there. And this is now kind of becoming a bit of a running trend where it is that train that's on the tracks, and Cameron's furiously laying down the tracks, but we don't know if there's even going to be a destination point. We don't know if the station's ready yet, or if it's ever going to get built. So it's like, he would have to go all in on this, and it's not like he would ever have the money himself, as rich as he probably was, and is at this point as well. It's not something he could self-finance like, say, George Lucas did back with Empire Strikes Back. He needed a lot of money to do this, and he needed a big studio behind him. And Fox at this time were beginning to get worried in 2006. They were worried about overruns, they were worried about budget, because of his history. He had a history of going over budget and going over schedule, and so they were concerned because this was a hugely ambitious film. And, the reliance on all of this CGI, I mean, most of the movie are entirely digital shots. So it's a real big, it's a money sink for one thing. It's going to cost them so much money, but, again, it's a gamble. And you look at the behind the scenes documentary on the Blu-ray, which is a fantastic hour and 40-minute documentary that somehow feels like a 20-minute fluff piece, because there's just, you're covering a film that took 4.5, 5 years to make, from fully, deciding I'm going to make this film to the film coming out. It was an intense period of time. It was the longest period that Cameron had ever worked on a single film. He called it the maybe not the toughest film he ever made in terms of The Abyss, because there was so much underwater shooting, but it was certainly the biggest movie he'd ever made and the longest he'd ever spent on a single film. So, huge project. And in mid-2006, 20th Century Fox decided to pass on Avatar. They weren't going to go ahead with it. And in the documentary, as I was saying, they don't really hint at that at all. It's almost like, oh, Fox was so supportive. They funded us for a year and it was all, we were working this out. But, if you read into it a little bit, Fox did, at one point decided to pass on Avatar. So Cameron picked up all this stuff that he'd been building up over the past year, went over to Disney and said, hey, do you want to do this film? And Disney said, yes, we do want to, we're interested. There is an interest in this. So they agreed to take over. And then 20th Century Fox, who had the first right of refusal, went, oh, hang on a minute. Well, no, it's okay. You come back. We'll work something out. We'll work something out. So once the threat of Disney making this movie became apparent, Fox decided to quickly change their tune. And they teamed up with a company called Ingenious Media. I don't know too much about them, but they kind of fronted more than half of the overall budget, which was an astronomical amount. And it's funny, in going through, talking about the budgets and stuff, as we're going through these films and, thinking back to Aliens, where they were kind of haggling over whether the final budget was going to be 15 million or 18 million. Now we're dealing in hundreds of millions, and now we're getting to a point where every consecutive film that Cameron makes is the most expensive film ever made up until that point. So this Ingenious Media company agreed to front more than half of the budget, which was apparently $237 million. And in October of 2006, Fox committed to Avatar. This film was going to happen. In January of 2007, the film was formally announced, and I actually have here, I wrote this down because it's quite interesting. This was Cameron's kind of statement and kind of his summary of what Avatar was going to be as a story. He said, "It's an emotional journey of redemption and revolution, the story of a wounded former Marine thrust unwillingly into an effort to settle and exploit an exotic planet rich in biodiversity, who eventually crosses over to lead the indigenous race in a battle for survival." And that kind of gives away the whole plot, really, kind of gives away what's going on with the main character and everything, but it's kind of an interesting mission statement, I guess. It just kind of gives you a brief taste of what this film was going to be, and then it's called Avatar. So the alleged budget of the film was actually apparently between $280 million and $310 million. At the time, just absolutely batshit bonkers. Now, this is before the time of... Well, it's not really before, it's actually right at the beginning of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but even then, I don't think the films around that time in the late 2000s were anywhere near as big in budget as they became maybe 5-10 years later. So we've had some big superhero movies that probably had absolutely just disgustingly outrageous budgets, but for the time, this was really huge. Though an official spokesperson for 20th Century Fox said that the budget is $237 million flat, that is it, plus $150 million for marketing. Which, I don't know, I'm sure a lot of people know, and if you're watching this video and have come this far, you probably know that marketing and promotion costs a fuck ton. We're talking, hundreds of millions in some cases, and if not, you're talking at least 100 million to promote and market your film worldwide. It is an incredibly expensive venture, and an incredibly dangerous one as well. it's such a gamble, right? You could pour millions into marketing and just no one shows up, and what a waste of money. You'd be better off just releasing it and hoping for the best. But again, it's a gamble, and it's show business, right? Now, the genesis of kind of Cameron's inspiration for the story of this, he says, is based on every science fiction book he ever read, the adventure stories that he read growing up, and really a combination of everything. He said that some people want to ask him, what's the kind of genesis point? The one thing that kicks this all off, and he said it's nothing. It's it's everything. It's his childhood growing up in the rural Canada, in the woods, and exploring and being interested in wildlife, and we talked about this before, and that really informed his love of nature and science, and those things kind of fused together in Avatar, I think, and kind of also his love of science fiction and the possibilities of technology in a slightly fantastical world. And one of the things the film gets a lot of criticism for, which we'll maybe talk about more in the next video, which will be my thoughts on the film itself, is how derivative it is of other stories. But if you look back when the film came out, Cameron was very upfront about his kind of sources of inspiration. He talks about films such as At Play in the Fields of the Lord, The Emerald Forest, Dances with Wolves even. A lot of people would say, Avatar's just dances with wolves in space, but he's like, no, absolutely. That's a great story. And he likes the idea of a classic tale, something that has been told before, and kind of a story that people recognize. And he says, I think returning to classic tales is a profound thing. And it's kind of these stories that we recognize, but with a different slant on it, a different twist. And so that to him is an exciting thing. And it is a very simple story. And it is a story that we've seen before. But it's about the world, and it's about the message that the film is conveying. In fact, one film that I was quite pleased to see was on the list for Cameron, or was a film that he said he explicitly homages in Avatar, is Princess Mononoke, which has a lot of similar themes and is kind of this epic fantasy and has a very strong environmentalist message as well, and one of my all-time favorite films. But it's just intriguing to me because you look at what George Lucas did with Star Wars, and I think I've talked about this before. George Lucas was referencing and using bits and pieces from world cinema and Kurosawa and great westerns and classic, sci-fi and adventure serials, and no one really seemed to notice all that much, at least as far as the wider audience is concerned. In later years, it became a celebrated part of the Star Wars story that George Lucas took from so many different places and maybe was better at masking it and hiding it and creating something new. And with Cameron, perhaps, he's drawing on all these other stories and films to create Avatar. But, with something like Dances with Wolves, that was a big mainstream movie. It's not like the general kind of movie-going audience in 1977 was going to be well-versed in Kurosawa films or, 1930s sci-fi serials. So maybe that's where there's a hiccup there, where Cameron gets a lot more slack for it than I believe he should. Art inspires art, art begets art, and yes, that does mean I'm saying Avatar is art. I'll just let that sink in. Now, speaking of art, the concept art for this film is gorgeous, like absolutely stunning. And some of that kind of bioluminescent stuff is just absolutely gorgeous. And one of the big kind of key sequences in the film in terms of just visual wonder is the Hallelujah Mountains, these floating mountains. I love how it has like an actual scientific explanation, which may not hold water in the real world, but at least there's an attempt, where it's about the contents of the earth, of Pandora's kind of, there's something to do with like the magnetic pull. I just like that, and so that's kind of why the floating mountains exist, because there's something to do with gravity. Again, it would have been a better point made if I'd remembered exactly how it relates to the explanation, but I like that there is an explanation, and it's kind of it's a neat thing, but the visual is just incredible. And that was based on a lot of different landscapes in China, certain rock formations and mountains, and lots of reference taken from there. There is one of many, I could make a whole video about this if I wanted to, but I don't want to. One of the many lawsuits that Cameron has had leveled against him of plagiarism when it comes to Avatar. One of them was from, I don't know why Roger Dean is popping into my head, but there was an artist who would do this kind of abstract, colorful science fiction art that was used in various album covers for bands. And he sued Cameron for the likeness of some of those images in what was in Avatar, and I don't think he won that case. And I think of the many numerous Avatar lawsuits, the cases haven't been won. And I've read into some of them. I was intrigued, and a lot of them just don't hold much water at all. And maybe some of them do, but I think that. If we're going to start looking at Cameron and pointing fingers and saying, hey, he took inspiration from this and he stole this, then, really we should be looking at George Lucas and saying, well, look at what he stole from Kurosawa and what he stole from this. So, it just always bugs me, really, that Lucas gets so celebrated for doing the exact same thing. And with Cameron, it's maybe a bit more obvious, and maybe that's kind of the hang-up. I don't know. Anyway, so the Hallelujah Mountains, based very much on these Chinese landscapes, and maybe or maybe not these album covers by this particular artist. But the reason that Cameron decided to go ahead with Avatar in general over Battle Angel Alita was really the fact that Avatar for him has a very strong environmentalist message, and he believed that it was more important and pertinent to make the film as soon as possible, sooner, and take precedent over Alita, because he felt like it was a very pressing issue. And it became to the point where his kind of passion for the environment bled over to the sets when they were making the movie, and it was a vegan-only kind of catering for everyone who worked on the film. So he really became passionate about that, and I don't know when that passion started, and caring about the environment and how things need to change, and climate change is a big issue. But he felt that with Avatar, there's a real chance to connect with an audience over this big spectacle, but also to make them think about the way that they interact with nature and with the world, and to really think about the consequences of our footprint on the world. And the way that the film presents that is a very on-the-nose kind of it's a very on-the-nose point that gets made very clearly and straightforward. You understand kind of the message that's coming across. But he says that, even if it is just a very small change, he'll take it. Even if it just makes someone think twice, he'll take it. And I admire that. I respect that. And that's one of the driving, forces behind him deciding to make this film. Before Alita, that is, was that environmentalist theme and message that the film could convey to a very large audience. And I think he knew, based on, his own clout. I'm the guy who made Titanic and Terminator 2, and people are going to come out and see the movie, so it really is a chance to not only push the boundary, not only tell a great story, but to send a good message that hopefully will trickle down to some people. And when the film came out, people were, they were very much also seeing it's a very, again, it's an on-the-nose point about the environment, but it's also a very on-the-nose point made about the military. And has a very strong kind of anti-war message that he openly has said is critiquing the US's involvement in the war in Iraq. And, the scene when they destroy the home tree, that's, it very much feels like a comparison to 9/11 in a lot of ways. And I don't think that was entirely intentional. I think some people probably believe that. But, it's a heavy thing. And Cameron said that, when it comes to this sort of thing, and especially that scene when they're just carelessly, you have the Quaritch, played by Stephen Lang, just stood there with a cup of coffee as they're just firing these missiles at these people, just murdering them, slaughtering them. And it's that kind of distance and separation from the military and the people that they're killing that I think is still a real problem, and was a huge problem back at that point in time as well. And things, I don't know too much about the Iraq War. I have to say, for me, I'm very much I don't know. I don't know the term for it. This probably is a term for it, but I tend to not try and think about it because it just depresses me too much, because I think that it's absolutely insane that people are allowed to kill lots of other people because the government says it's okay because of some military movement. And, I don't agree with it. I understand why it's in place and why it's become necessary and a necessity as well. And that's based on just thousands and thousands of years of human conflict and how we can't avoid destroying each other, basically, unfortunately. So I understand it, but I still think it's absolute insanity, and I just try not to think about it or look into it too much, which some people probably disagree with and say you need to keep up on what's going on. I understand that, I respect that, but for me, I try not to look into it too much because it just, I like to just get on with my life and just try and enjoy it when I can. Anyway, completely off topic. At one point Cameron did say about that scene and just the way that the US military is critiqued and very much put on blast in Avatar. A quote that he said was, "We know what it feels like to launch the missiles, but what we don't know is what it feels like for it to land on our own soil in the US." And obviously the US has been attacked, but nowhere near as much as the countries that the US attack. And so that was another point he was trying to make. And again, if it's only made in a small way, then for him it's worth it. And I like that. I respect that it has that message in it that some people might balk at, like, oh, it should just be an entertainment blockbuster and keep the politics out of it. But I think, why not? That's certainly something that if I was making a film like this, I'd want to kind of push a message through as well. And there's ways of doing it where you're being more subtle, and there's ways of doing it where you're really blunt. And I think he lies more towards the blunt side, but at the same time, I think that with the story that he tells in Avatar, really makes an impact. I think, like, you really feel the weight of that situation, and you can compare that to many things. You can compare that to the way that the Native Americans were treated a very long time ago, just as much as you can relate it to how certain countries are treated by the US in military and war situations now. And again, I don't know too much about these things, but I think that it's a big part of Avatar's identity, and I think that that's a strength rather than a weakness. Now, the casting for Avatar was done, I believe, in late 2006. It must have been, because I think it was around October 2006 that they were given the green light by Fox, and so they started to put the main cast together. It's kind of a small cast, really, when you think about it, from the Na'vi down to the humans. As far as like actual speaking parts, it's fairly light, but there's a very strong core group of actors who are on board. And Sam Worthington, this is an interesting one, because to me, I find Sam Worthington to be a tremendously bland actor. No offense to the guy whatsoever, but I don't find him to have a great on-screen charisma. There are some people who you put them in front of a camera and they've just got something. Think of Paul Newman, jump straight to my head, Michael Keaton. These guys who they just ooze this kind of, it's just, there's a chemistry between the actor and the camera that just clicks, and it's just brilliant. And I don't think Sam Worthington has that. I think that he has a very bland kind of charisma, especially in relation to the camera. But I still think that he's a really good actor, and I think that he's actually perfect for the part of Jake Sully, this guy who goes in and becomes one of the Na'vi through this avatar body. I think that the great thing about the film for me, in terms of the main character, is how he gets this avatar, he goes into this other world, and that's exactly the journey that the audience is taking. We sit down and we go into another world, and so through him we live vicariously through kind of discovering this new culture and meeting Neytiri and kind of learning about the Na'vi way, and as he's learning about it, we're learning about it. So we become Jake Sully, and we become invested. We fall in love with Neytiri, and we want, the allegiance starts to change. Obviously, we're more ahead of the curve than he is, because he is kind of in the pocket of Quaritch, and he's there to kind of, do some kind of reconnaissance and kind of, get some messages back on what the Na'vi are doing and everything. And so we're ahead of him just a little bit, but at a later point in the film, I think the audience's kind of wishes and wants begin to line up again with Jake. But I just love the journey that you go through his character and through his eyes. And because he is kind of a bland character, he doesn't really have, he's a little bit snarky. That's pretty much it. He has a past that's pretty tragic and everything. He was wounded and, handicapped in the military. And he doesn't have a great personality. But I like that, because most of the people who sit down to watch a film don't really have it. Those kinds of people are rare. Those kinds of people become movie stars. You know what I mean? Like, so most of the people who sit down to watch a movie, they don't have that great charisma, and they love to live vicariously through people who do. But it's a different kind of flavor when you're living vicariously through someone who feels like you. And to me, I can relate to Sam Worthington's character because I feel a little bit like that guy. Yeah, I can be a bit snarky, and maybe I can make a few funny comments now and then, but I don't really have a great charisma about myself. And I'm not one of those people who lights up a room. I'm not one of those people who has a great charisma in front of a camera. So it's like, I don't know, I feel like it's just a really cool avatar for the audience to get into that film. And it and that sounds like the worst kind of there's a term for it where you're kind of making up excuses for bad writing or bad performance. I forget the term, that's going to bug me, but it's like I'm not backpedaling. What is it? I don't know, but there's a term for it. You probably know what it is, and you can leave it in the comments. But it sounds like I'm making up an excuse for a bad performance. I think it's a really good performance, in fact, and it's a really natural one. And he's naturally not that interesting. And most movie characters have something interesting about them. I'd say the same for Luke Skywalker in the original Star Wars films, actually. I think Mark Hamill gave a knockout performance in the Last Jedi, but in the first couple of films, he's a very good actor. Don't get me wrong, but in the first Star Wars movie, he's a fairly bland character. But that works because he's like the everyman, and to a lesser extent, I would say Sam Worthington captures that in the film. And when he was cast in the movie, he was very much down on his luck at the time. He talks about this in the documentary, how he had sold everything he owned. He just had some books and a $3,000 car. And so when he auditioned for Jake Sully, he was very much just like, whatever, and that kind of lackadaisical attitude and, not really feeling too much pressure allowed him to be more freer. So he's like, yeah, okay, it's James Cameron, the guy who did Aliens and Titanic, but let's just do the audition. And they just liked something about it. They kept coming back to him. And so he was the guy who they were thinking of for Jake Sully. And Fox were like, okay, so we need a star. We need a star for Avatar. And he ain't it. So Cameron had to really go to bat for it. I think the producer, probably John Lando, had to go to bat for, for Sam Worthington to be in this film. And it was actually Cameron's suggestion and kind of recommendation that got Sam Worthington the part in Terminator Salvation, which came out the same year as Avatar, after he'd worked with him on Avatar, obviously. And the next big lead to cast was Zoe Saldana as Neytiri. And, I mean, again, respect to Sam Worthington, who's a pretty good actor, but Zoe Saldana is an incredible actress. And she is just so perfect for Neytiri. I mean, I think it's one of my favorite performances ever. Which sounds weird, but honestly, I mean, I'd put Andy Serkis's performance as Caesar in the recent Planet of the Apes trilogy also among one of my favorite performances ever, just because it's a CGI character. You can feel that performance. And that's another thing that Cameron had talked about with his goal for the film. He says that making Avatar was like chasing a holy grail for him. The holy grail is to capture true human emotion through a digital character. And I think that the best example of that is in Neytiri. When you look at her face in some certain moments, the first time she smiles, it kind of lights up the screen, and you feel the performance of the actress really coming through in that character, and she's just amazing. And you see the side-by-side footage, in this big gray kind of volume, just with all these dots on her head and stuff, and it looks very uncinematic, but you see that emotion just pouring out of her face, and it perfectly rendered by the animators through the actual fully rendered digital model of Neytiri, and it's powerful. So she is absolutely great. They had a chemistry test to see how the two worked off each other, and that ultimately, and also they did an actual kind of camera test. So it was kind of like a shot like a movie, but just like a very close shot of the two of them kind of inspiring a war for the Na'vi, and like we're gonna take it to them. We're gonna fight. And it was, they're just in their kind of normal bodies. There's no CGI, but it's just giving you that kind of the flavor of a real kind of old school Hollywood camera test. And that was what ultimately sold Fox to agree with Cameron and Lando to cast Sam Worthington, at the very least, in the lead role of Jake Sully. Then we have Sigourney Weaver, and the cast is very good. Stephen Lang is a great villain, but I think the only other person I'll comment on for now is Sigourney Weaver, because she has a fairly big part to play in the story overall, and Cameron initially was not too sure about working with Sigourney Weaver again. I mean, he loved Sigourney and loved working with her in Aliens, but he felt like it was a bit too close to the bone, making a film about, aliens and, having her involved. He thought, I don't know, we've done it before, and he talks about how when they worked on Aliens, it was a very formative experience for both of them early on in their careers. It was a big, successful film for him. It earned her an Academy Award nomination, and so, that was a special, sacred project for the two of them. And he thought, it's just a bit too close to home. And then he just thought, what, I'm being an idiot. She's perfect for Grace Augustine, this character who, has studied the Na'vi and lived among them and was teaching them English. She has a great backstory, Grace Augustine. And in fact, before Sigourney came on the film, she was named Grace Shipley. So there's a fun clip in the documentary of him saying, I'm changing the name from Shipley. I don't want Shipley and Ripley, so Grace Augustine will be the name of this character. And Sigourney loved working with James Cameron again. She really bought into this movie. I don't know how old she was when she made this, but she was getting on a bit, maybe in her late 50s, perhaps early 60s. And because I think she's around 75 now. She looks incredible for her age. So she might have been, it might have been early 60s when she made Avatar, and she's like rolling around, and the scene, if you remember in Avatar, when she gets plugged out of her body, and you just see the Na'vi version of Grace kind of just, her eyes roll back into her head and she collapses, like Sigourney did that on the set and just, collapsed. And she's doing all this physical stuff, and she's getting involved, but also she loved doing it, and she found it to be really interesting and unique, and she really embraced it. And I can't wait to see what she does in the sequel or sequels, depending on how big her role is and how the fuck they've worked her into the story. But it was just cool to see her and James Cameron back together again. But more importantly, she fucking nails it. She does a great job. It just feels like a really good character that she just embodies completely, and she does a great job. And before they started actually filming the movie in February of 2007, Cameron took the main cast to Hawaii to get a feel of being in a rainforest, so that when they would do the motion capture stuff on the stage, they would get a feel for at least some of what they'd be imagining their characters to be interacting with. And so he had Sigourney Weaver out there, and she really got into the spirit of it. And then Zoe Saldana, who, she was put in kind of an outfit to kind of represent Neytiri, and so she was not, it seemed like she was maybe a bit uncomfortable to do that. She thought she'd just be in like her regular clothes and stuff, but they're kind of roughing it, and kind of, I don't know if they camped out as such, but they're definitely there like cooking and like collecting bits of trees and stuff. And Cameron's just filming all this reference footage of the way they interact with the trees and the light and everything, and that became actual kind of reference material for the film itself and the digital elements of the story on Pandora. So he was really putting the actors through their paces in terms of the preparation and horse riding training, and anything that related to what they were physically doing in the movie, he'd have the actors be given specific training. And this is a case where there's a lot of action in the film, and it isn't like, okay, they're riding horses here or they're firing bows and arrows, so let's just do all that digitally and the actors don't need to do any of that stuff. No, they're doing all that stuff, all the physicality, the actors are doing it, even though it's motion capture. So it was nothing, no corners were cut, And I have to mention this. This is a really interesting one. I love Cameron, but his ego sometimes is just like, it's kind of wild to see it in action. In the Avatar documentary, he talks about how he wanted a differentiation for the way that the Na'vi fired the bow and arrow. So traditionally, you pull back like this. He wanted them to go like this with a reverse grip. And the kind of bow expert who was working with them in the training said that, it's not possible to fire a bow like that. And Cameron says, the expert told me it couldn't be done. I said, oh, really? Come with me. He said, I picked up the bow, I went like this. I said, see that bush over there, 75 meters away? And I shot it straight and hit it the first time. And it's like, and he said the expert was like, oh, I guess you can do it. And Cameron's like, yeah, prove my point. And you just think, what a dick. What a dick. And he kind of backpedals in the interview, and he's like, but to be fair, I was practicing all day, and it was a lucky shot. But, the way that he's just like, oh, you can't? Come with me, And actually, one more thing I'll say about the documentary is that the producer, John Landau, he has a funny way about him. Like, everything he talks about in the documentary, he has this kind of real, it's kind of like an endearing smugness, like when he talks about how Weta Digital were going to wait for like a year to see if Avatar would get greenlit or not before they'd work on it. And he's like, they'd never done this before, but they were going to wait for Avatar to get green. Like, this is like a smugness. He's hyping everything. He feels like a good hype man, but I just found that very interesting. Almost everything he said in the documentary, it felt like a very kind of, and this and this, because this is so great, and it's James Cameron. Like, it's just like a satisfied kind of smugness that you can't help but like be slightly endeared by. I don't know, because it feels like he has good intentions, So in February 2007, they did the kind of Hawaii kind of preparation and all the training probably leading up to that. And by April 2007, principal photography began in Los Angeles on the Volume, this big stage where they would do all the motion capture stuff. And they did that for, I believe, a month, which is a fairly short time. But a lot of that stuff, again, was really pioneering how motion capture was captured. Because they have the dots on the suits, and they have the cameras on their face, kind of, for reference footage for the animators and stuff. But also, the way they're filming it is not really with a camera, but it's this virtual camera. And so Cameron's there kind of, he can see a fully like rendered, in very rough form, like pre-visualization form of the scenario in Pandora. He can see that on the screen as he's holding the camera, and he can move it around. And we'll get back to that in a little bit, but it's really just, it's interesting stuff. And he found himself, when he was doing the motion capture, filming, just kind of complaining about what he could do if it was live action, like the advantages he was missing out on. But when it came to the live action stuff, he was then complaining about how easy it was with the with the digital photography and the motion capture virtual camera stuff. Like, it's just so easy just to adjust things very quickly. The actors enjoyed it because there was no need to wait around for lights to be set up, so you could kind of jump right into the action. But it's still difficult when you're just running around in grey jumpsuits, and there isn't all that much to kind of get you into that world. Even though they got the little screen that shows you the pre-visualization or kind of the in real time visualization, it's still not. There's a lot of heavy acting work that needs to go on, but I think different actors work with that scenario differently. I know that Sam Worthington really enjoyed it. He thought it just brought it back to the basics of acting, especially when he was doing scenes with Zoe Saldana, because it's just me and an actor and our eyes. We got all this stupid shit on, but we have our eyes, and that's the key to acting. It's just reacting off another person. So he kind of thrived on it, I think, and a lot of other actors did as well. And then in October 24th, 2007, the live-action principal photography began in New Zealand, in Wellington. So this is where they were going to do a lot of the sets and the live-action stuff with Sigourney Weaver and the characters when they're not inside their Navi avatars. And in March of 2008, the film wrapped production in terms of the principal photography. And after that, Cameron then went back to the virtual stage, the volume, and began to then direct footage that had already been filmed. So what he's essentially doing is taking footage that was recorded during the motion capture stage of principal photography, and he would then run a scene and pick up the virtual camera and walk around wherever he wanted to frame it exactly where he wanted it. And once he'd done that, they'd then capture that, and that shot would then be finalized and then sent off to the digital teams at Weta or ILM, and they would then fully realize that in kind of full high definition resolution with all the textures and the lighting and all that kind of stuff and reflections. So it was like, I think he did that for a year. He did a year's worth of the virtual camera directing the stuff that had already been shot. So it was like, the motion capture photography, live action, and then virtually directing the stuff he'd already. And it's a very complicated process and everything. But at the same time, it feels like, to me, it would be such a great tool for telling a story, and you have so many options, and the kind of the real-time responsiveness of moving around with that virtual camera sounds really exciting, but at the same time, it's like, there are so many options. Like, I just feel like it would the scope of it would just overwhelm me. There's just so many ways that you can take it in every single situation, and it almost feels like too much freedom. But then I guess that's what makes a really great director, is knowing where to find what you're looking for and not get caught up in the 100,000 different variations of what you can do when you are working with digital technology, where there literally are just millions of different things that you can do in terms of coloring and light and texture. And then in this case, where you move the camera, because it's, you're no longer set on a kind of a strict schedule. I mean, I'm sure the scheduling was strict and everything. And at one point, Cameron said that in the last year of production on the film and post-production, he had like 3 or 4 days off in the entire year in terms of the post-production schedule. But when you're on a set and like time is money, and you got to get the camera in the right place and you got to film it, and once you filmed it, it's done. That's it. He could probably go back and say, I want to change the angle of this scene a little bit, and very easily do it with the virtual camera. So it's just an entirely different way of making a film. So it took a year for the first full CGI shots for the film to come through. In May 2008 was when the first few shots of Neytiri and Jake Sully came in. And this is when they realized this is going to work. They were stunned. Like, they were just, oh my God, look at this. It's incredible. And I have to say that the film, and I think I read at one point Cameron said that, at the beginning, they had the visual effects shots coming in, but by the end, that stuff was really great, because now they're learning as they're going. There's a snowball effect going on. So while it took like over a year for like a few shots to come in, and they now have, I think, like over 2,500 visual effects shots in the entire movie, which is absolutely staggering. Absolutely just ridiculous when you think about how many visual effects shots were in movies, even big blockbuster movies before that. But this, this Avatar is almost like an animated movie. Like, so much of it is in that digital realm. And with Pandora and everything, we're looking at like fully CG, rainforest stuff. I mean, they built a few little sets here and there, but it's nothing compared to the actual scope of the world they created entirely within a computer. And I read that the world of the Na'vi and the Pandora, locations took up a petabyte of data, which I believe is 1,000 terabytes, and like every minute of like CGI footage would take up around 17 gigabytes of hard drive space. So and they were pushing the technology to the max and layering in all the reference videos and stuff. I mean, it was just like pushing the systems to breaking point. Things were starting to crash because they were just absolutely just bending that hardware as much as it could be bent before it snapped. They were really pushing everything they could with all the technology and the computers on this one. But yeah, like I was saying, there's a shot in the beginning when Jake first wakes up in the Avatar body, in the Na'vi body, and I remember watching it a couple of years ago and going, oh, this one doesn't hold up as well visually. And this is near the beginning, so I'm like, oh no, is the whole film not going to look as good as I remember? But later on, it just looks stunning. It really holds up, and I think some of the shots are those early ones that weren't quite perhaps as finessed as the other ones. But ultimately, it doesn't feel like an experience that isn't cohesive in terms of the visual look of the Na'vi and everything. But there are just some particular shots where you can tell they've gone the extra mile to really give you that wow factor, and it's unbelievable. Now, in April of 2009, so this is, it's about a year of Cameron doing that kind of virtual directing stuff and kind of really nailing down all of the shots in the film so it could be sent off to the visual effects houses. In April 2007, he did some live action pickups. So there's a few more things he needed to film or refilm and get just right before kind of settling in for the final round of pre-production. Now, the film was initially scheduled to be released on the 22nd of May 2009, but as pretty much any Cameron film, well, not pretty much anyone, but I think Titanic went over and had to be delayed, and of course the Avatar sequels have been delayed. I mean, that's just kind of a running joke at this point, is the Avatar sequels are never going to come out because they keep getting delayed. But yeah, it did not surprise me because at the time I wasn't really aware of it coming out, to be honest with you. 2009 for me, I wasn't really into movies that much. I mean, I was and I wasn't. I think I just stopped my unlimited card in the cinema. So I wasn't as interested in going to see everything that came out, and I wasn't really keeping tabs on the production of Avatar or anything like that. But it didn't surprise me to read that it was supposed to come out in May of 2009 and was pushed back to December. So, Cameron needed more time, the visual effects guys needed more time, and there was a lot of stuff that needed to be done for this film to be, fully finished. Then they started to really think about, okay, how are we going to present this to the world in terms of building up anticipation and excitement outside of just doing a trailer. So in August of 2009, they released the first images from the film, and a little bit of a teaser in terms of just what to expect from the story. And then in the Cinema Expo convention in Amsterdam, I think in August of 2009, it might have been July actually, because I'm not entirely sure where it lines up with the San Diego Comic-Con, because they also went to the San Diego Comic-Con. But in Cinema Expo, they showed, I think, 25 minutes of the film. They showed a big chunk, and they also showed the scene where Jake is holding his hand out, and the white things, they land on his hand, and they were concerned about showing, and they literally say this in the documentary, they were concerned about showing too much of the Fern Gully moments in the film. So again, that's a film people say, oh, they're just ripping off Fern Gully. It's like, they're aware that it's similar. They understand the similarities and stuff. But they went with it, and they showed it to people, and it was a good response. It was like a promising response. San Diego Comic-Con, not so much. Apparently, it was a little bit more lukewarm. People weren't really sure of what they were seeing. But they felt like it worked better than a 2-minute trailer. So when the trailer went out, that was when really the kind of anticipation started to turn into more gleeful kind of awaiting of a big failure. People were thinking that this film was going to be a massive failure, and it was going to tank, and it was Titanic all over again. People were willfully hoping that the film would be a massive bomb, a flop at the box office. And they just thought it was this weird film with Smurfs and weird blue people. People didn't really get it. Some people did, of course, but a lot of people just weren't that excited about it. And Sam Worthington talks about doing press for another movie when the trailer dropped, and he found it difficult because he's like, they're just asking him about how bad the film looks, and he wants to defend it because he doesn't really know what to say, but he stands behind the film and he loves where the film is going and stuff. But he found that kind of difficult, and Cameron said, at the time they posted a trailer, and then there's 7,500 comments about how bad the movie is, and the film hasn't even come out yet. And I have another quote here actually, which I thought was interesting from Cameron, and he's talking about the pre-release kind of anticipation from the movie-going audience. He said, "I think if anyone was embracing the film before the fact, the film could never live up to expectation. Have them go with some sense of wanting to find the answer." I think that's kind of a key way of looking at it. And also, I think there's also a sense of people wanting to go see it just to see, like, how bad is this going to be? Because it all starts to build up in the kind of public consciousness of this is going to be a big bomb. And it was kind of what Fox was predicting. And some kind of, industry experts predicted that, I think it was Alvin and the Chipmunks, the Squeakquel, that Fox was releasing in December as well. And some people theorized that Fox was doing this just to kind of distract from the incoming disaster that was going to be Avatar. So a lot of people didn't have faith in the film, but in November 28th of 2009, the last day of post-production was wrapped and the film was essentially ready to go. I think they were working up until the end in terms of maybe final touches, but also they wanted to kind of equip every cinema in the world essentially with the best possible setup to show this film with a stereoscopic 3D, because there's different types of 3D around the world. There's the IMAX 3D, the real 3D system. And so they wanted to, to do something that hadn't really been done before, and that was to really send out kind of instructions and specifications for every kind of screen type and all that kind of thing. So Cameron wanted, and the producer, John Landau, wanted, everyone who went to see it to have the most perfect experience possible. And they were dedicated and committed to making that a reality. And, finishing the film from a visual effects standpoint was just incredibly, it was a mountain to climb, like a huge, like an Everest of visual effects. And so they did work heavily with Weta Digital, but they also worked with ILM, who was, I think that ILM before Weta was probably like the number one, like the top dog of visual effects in the world. I think these days ILM and Weta are probably neck and neck pretty much. But then they also outsourced to smaller visual effects houses for some of the more less intensive moments of visual effects in the film, like some of the live action stuff, like some of the map that comes up when they're looking at the home tree and stuff in Pandora and the forest. So little things like that were handed off to other visual effects companies just to get it all done, because there was just so much at play there that it was, it needed to get done, and the film needed to be finished. And one thing I probably should have mentioned earlier in terms of the timeline here, something I found really fascinating that was in the documentary actually, and Richard Taylor, who is an incredible production designer, I think that's his official term, I'm not entirely sure, but he worked on the Lord of the Rings films and the building of props, these physical props and costumes and weapons and stuff. And he's just an amazing guy in terms of the process of thinking about the logistics and the history of the items that he's making for films. And with Avatar, they actually made everything that you see in the film in terms of the Na'vi people. So like their clothes, like the headdresses, everything, like the weapons, they were all made physically. Now, I don't know if they scanned those into the computer to get a nice photorealistic kind of model to work off of, but it was just just to get the feeling and the flavor of it. And it almost seems like a frivolous thing, and it goes to some of the details in Lord of the Rings where they made so many props that you'd never really see all of them on screen, but just the dedication to go that extra mile almost seems to just add an extra layer to the film itself, even if you can't see it, So I was quite surprised at that level of dedication and also budget to actually make the actual props and costumes that were never going to be used in the film, but were there to kind of, just to give a flavor for everything. That was really interesting to me. But anyway, so they're wrapping the film up, November of 2009, and the last bits of visual effects are coming together. And then also the score, which is a huge part of any film, especially a big film like this, where it's it's just this big sweeping saga, especially in the case of Avatar, this science fiction epic. And so Cameron reteamed with James Horner, who worked with him on his previous film Titanic and also Aliens. And James Horner called this the most difficult film he's ever worked on and the biggest job he's ever undertaken. And that's not a negative. It was a huge, as he says, a huge undertaking. And he actually essentially created two scores, one for the live action portion, one for the Pandora section of the film, which is pretty much the whole movie. And he went in and used all these kinds of, traditional instruments and things that had kind of an earthy quality to them, so that the sound really has a texture to it and sounds different from a traditional orchestration. And they say in the documentary they called the instruments used ethnic instruments. I don't know if that's really the most politically correct way to call it. I really don't know. That's the thing these days. You wonder, even 10 years ago, was that the wrong thing to say? But, all these different kinds of traditional instruments, nothing that's like professionally produced, and those were kind of the basis of a lot of the Na'vi stuff. I didn't even talk about the Na'vi language. Cameron brought in a guy to create a language. I don't think it's to the depth of Tolkien's work on Lord of the Rings, but certainly all of the weird kind of pronunciations and stuff. And Cameron was working on the language himself, but he needed an expert to come in. So this expert came in and really rounded it off and made it a proper language. And even some of the auditions for the actors, they would get thrown a curveball and say, okay, you're about to tape your audition, but it's not in English. And some of the actors walked out because they just were not happy about that. Some people stuck with it, and that's how they got the job, But an entire language was created for this. And, there are like hundreds of pages worth of kind of, these writings about the plant life of the world of Avatar and stuff, and there's just so much detail. There's such a rich and diverse world on that planet that's been created, and the backstory that you'll never see in the film, but is all there in like the supplements of the Blu-ray. And I almost wanted to read the script because you get to see his original treatment and his final script on the Blu-ray, but I'm not that much of a super fan to go into that detail like I did with perhaps, say, Aliens. But I don't know, I think maybe in a few years when the sequels come out, I would like to go back to the Blu-ray and just devour everything, all of those, because I watched the main documentary and some of the featurettes, but there's so much more to discover in terms of like thousands of images of concept art and the original script and everything. But there's just so much detail. I think there is like a document on the Blu-ray that's like 600 pages long, and it's just full of all this information about the plant life and the animals, the creatures, and the Na'vi history. It's just incredible. Such an amazing level of detail, which goes, I think, unnoticed by some people. And they do just look at Avatar as this kind of superficial, derivative story that's just made to make money. And I think that couldn't really be further from the truth. I think so much love and care and attention and detail went into this film and the world building of this film that is really staggering to me. And I like that stuff. It's not, I wouldn't sit down and read that 600-page document, but it is cool to me. And one link that I found really interesting, to go all the way back to the early 80s. Again, there's all these little threads that kind of come back to Avatar and kind of ripple back through time. Is the Thanator, the big kind of panther creature on Pandora, which you briefly see in the rainforest when Jake is kind of confronted with it, and it's this six-legged, and all of the creatures are six-legged. It's kind of like a smooth panther. And that is how Cameron described the aliens in his script Mother, which eventually became Aliens, these six-limbed, panther-like alien creatures. So just the little germ of an idea somewhere, 20, 30 years earlier, then becomes a reality in one of his films later on. Even Stephen Lang, who played Quaritch, he originally auditioned for Aliens, and Cameron remembered that audition and liked it, but obviously didn't use him, and thought of him, 20 years later for Avatar. And Stephen Lang thought that was incredible, that, he remembered his audition, and that was kind of worked part in, of him getting cast in the part. So that was really interesting. Avatar to me feels like a culmination of so many things that Cameron was interested in and was working on throughout his entire career, and it all just comes together in this one big piece. Now we're just going to talk about the film coming out, because this has been an incredibly long video, and I thought it would be a bit shorter than this, so I apologize if you're still listening. So the film had its premiere in London on December 10th, 2009, and then had its wide release around the world between the 16th and the 18th of December 2009. And as we all know, it was a fucking juggernaut. The predictions that this was going to be a big failure, all were completely untrue. Well, not even untrue, because untrue kind of implies that they knew the truth and just lied. No, but it was it just didn't come to pass. It was not how people thought it was going to go. They're kind of almost gleefully kind of waiting for the Cameron movie to finally fail, for the king of the world to be dethroned by his own hubris of trying to make a film this massive. I think people were kind of hoping that he would fail, given how colossally he succeeded with Titanic in his previous film. And it had been 12 years since he made an actual film, and so I think that people were kind of intrigued by that, and also excited by that, and also apprehensive about it, so this is so many different conflicting emotions. And the first reviews started coming in, and it was very positive. Roger Ebert gave the film 4 out of 4 stars. He said that it was sort of like how he felt in the cinema in 1977 watching Star Wars for the first time. This whole new world had been created, and these new possibilities became apparent to cinema, you know, in terms of like blockbuster cinema, you know, and that kind of the high level A+ kind of marquee, you know, blockbuster filmmaking. So the film got a lot of good reviews. It had some negative reviews, and people, you know, again would say, oh, it's Dances with Wolves in Space, which, you know, I kind of forget the part where Kevin Costner kind of transported his consciousness inside a Native American. But, you know, I get the comparisons. I do understand. But I think when you start saying that the film wasn't any good because it's similar to this, I think that you have a really shit argument, in my opinion. I think, tell me what you don't like about the film, instead of saying, well, it's like this. You know, it just seems really weak to me, you know, and again, you never really hear that with Star Wars or other movies that take from lots of different influences and stuff, and hell, even Quentin Tarantino. But, you know, these filmmakers, they take them and they turn them into something else, and I would argue that Avatar is something else. I think that Avatar has Cameron's real sensibilities of like, you know, star-crossed lovers and kind of that, you know, grand romance that I think he really loves. Again, go back to Terminator. It's about this guy who travels through time because he's in love with this woman who he's only seen a picture of. You know, I travel through time for you, Sarah. I love you. I always have. It's so cheesy, you know. And then you have Avatar, and it's a similar kind of story, but it's these things that he's concerned with, and you do see this also the transition and progression and evolution of how Cameron deals with weaponry and action. You know, you look at the Terminator, there's guns firing off, it's cool. Terminator 2, there's guns firing off, it's cool. Aliens, there's guns firing off, it's cool. True Lies, guns firing off, it's fucking cool. And then you get to Avatar, and there are guns firing off, and there is a weight and a consequence to those bullets flying. And it feels like a maturing of, for me, a great filmmaker. And I know that a lot of people hate the film, but I love it, and I'll talk about why I love it in the next video. We'll wrap this thing up very, very shortly now as we talk about the final stretches here, where the film was released, and it hit $1 billion. Well, first of all, it had a $77 million opening weekend, which was pretty fucking strong. Well, it wasn't a record breaker or anything, but it was soon set to break record after record, and these records started falling like fucking dominoes. Avatar just fucking captured something. In the same way that Titanic struck a chord. And it's difficult because the money that Avatar made kind of became the full story, and I think that ultimately worked against the film in terms of how people perceive it. And I've always said this, but Avatar is one of those fascinating films where it's literally the most successful film of all time, that really doesn't have a big fan base, and not many people seem to like it. I don't know how that has really happened. With Titanic, at least, there was a backlash, but there's still a big fan base for that movie. With Avatar, there are fans of it, you know, and I would consider myself a fan, but there isn't really a fan base, it doesn't feel like. Maybe I'm just missing out on a corner of the internet where people really love it, but it just didn't seem to catch on, you know, with a longevity that perhaps might come around with the sequels. And I really have a faith in the sequels, and we'll talk more about those in future videos, but it's just an interesting one. It's just fascinating to me. And they talk about how, you know, the film made $1 billion in the first 19 days, and Cameron was saying in the interviews in the press that it's not going to beat Titanic. Titanic just was special. It struck a chord with an audience, and it was, you know, we're not going to topple that record. And then after a couple more weeks, Cameron said, I think it's just a matter of time now before we break that record. And within 35 days, on January 31st, 2010, the film crossed the $2 billion mark. And it is worth noting that the film was being shown in 3D and in IMAX screens, and so you get the premium price on that with the 3D and the IMAX, and also ticket prices had gone up $2 to $3 since 1997 when Titanic. So I think that you look at the whole, kind of adjusted for inflation grosses, but either way, Avatar quickly became, within about a month or two, the highest grossing movie of all time. The most successful film of all time in many ways. And yeah, you can point to, well, the ticket prices were a bit high and everything, but even if you take that out of the equation, it was a hugely successful film. It was a film that people were talking about when it came out, and the 3D and the revolution of this new media. I mean, 3D had been around since, like, the dawn of cinema pretty much, but, and there was like a big boom in the 50s, I think, but it really came around again in the late 2000s, and really heading into Avatar. And then for like the early 2010s, it was just like everywhere. Every film was 3D, 3D, 3D. And it never really caught on, and it fizzled out, unfortunately. Well, I don't know why I just said unfortunately. I don't like 3D. That was a weird thing to say. I think I'm saying unfortunately because 3D TVs have gone, and I kind of liked just experimenting with watching 3D Blu-rays, but the 3D TVs have been out of production now, and I have a bunch of 3D Blu-rays that can't be watched. But anyway, so it's not unfortunate. I don't like 3D in cinemas, I have to say. There's been a few occasions where I've kind of enjoyed it, and it's still around. You can still see films in 3D and stuff, but it doesn't get pushed as much as it used to maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago. And Avatar certainly just took the trend that was growing around that time and just like drop kicked the door off of it, and just everyone was trying to do 3D. All the big movies are 3D, 3D, 3D. But that was one of the things that drew people in, was the 3D aspect, the fact that it was James Cameron, and then just the word of mouth, and just how much of an incredible experience it was visually. I remember my family talking about it, and my dad saying how amazing it was. People just love this film, and people would go back and again and again. That's the only way a film like this makes that much money, is when people go again and again and again. And that's what happened. And I don't know, I don't know where it went wrong. I don't know where it all went wrong for Avatar. But anyway, it came out, just before the Oscar season. It got a little bit of buzz there, and it was nominated for 9 Oscars, including Best Picture and Best Director, but won a respectful 3 Oscars for Best Art Direction, Best Visual Effects, and Best Cinematography, which I would entirely agree with. I haven't seen a lot of the films that came out around that time, so I wouldn't say whether I think it should have won Best Picture or Best Director. But it was an interesting circumstance in which Catherine Bigelow, Cameron's ex-wife, was also up for Best Picture and Best Director, and she ultimately ended up winning Best Director. I think she was the first and only woman to win Best Director, which is just crazy to me. But Cameron was very supportive of that, and he actually said that to him, the best case scenario would be Avatar wins Best Picture and she wins Best Director, because he believed that she deserved the Best Director more than he did. So I like that, he really respected, his ex-wife in that sense. And apparently his relationship with her is a very strong one. Like they still kind of good friends and stuff, and he really was happy for her to win that Oscar. But in terms of winning Best Picture and Best Director and kind of sweeping the Oscars again like Titanic, not so much. Again, he didn't become the king of the world in that sense, but I think he did win a Golden Globe. I think Avatar won Best Picture in terms of best like drama or whatever they call it. There's 2 Best Pictures in the Golden Globes, isn't there? There's Best Comedy or Musical and Best Drama. I think it was Best Drama that it won. So Cameron got his speech. And I will say this, actually, when I've seen the Golden Globe speech, and Cameron, I think he turns to the cast and he does this kind of like the Na'vi kind of phrase, and that to me is like so much more cringeworthy than anything he said in the King of the World speech at the Oscars. I don't know. I mean, there's a little bit of with the King of the World thing, even though I kind of appreciate it and stuff, and I've talked about that before. But when he's doing the Na'vi quoting, that feels like it's really indulgent, and I think, ooh, it's a bit grimy. I don't know, not grimy, I don't know, it just gets under my skin a little bit, and I think, well, maybe you shouldn't have done that. Anyway, that's all random aside. So one thing I want to wrap up with is that in August of 2010, August 27th, Avatar was re-released in cinemas. I don't know whether, obviously it's a money thing, there's no way it wasn't, and this is a whole other subject, but I guess with Avatar, it's probably the best film for Cameron to discuss it. People talk a lot about how movies make a lot of money, and movies and the big blockbusters, they're there to make money, and they're just there on a production line. And to an extent, that's true. They look at the Marvel movies, or they're just theme parks. They're just there to make money. In a way, yes, that's true. But there can also be great storytellers, pure storytellers, who get to tell a story within that big blockbuster moneymaker. And then there are artists who get to work in that world and do great art, and actors who get to do great performances. And then you can have this great film that is a great film but also makes a lot of money and serves both purposes. Now, sometimes that doesn't happen. A lot of the times that doesn't happen. But with Avatar, I don't think this was a film that was motivated by money. Cameron, at that point in his career, could pretty much do whatever he wanted. And for him, it's about pushing the boundary, doing something no one had ever done before, and just wowing people on a visual scale, and then hitting their heart with an emotional story and leaving them with at least a small part in their mind that might think, maybe I should think about nature a little bit differently. Maybe I should think about the military a little bit more differently. So for him, it's kind of serving multiple purposes, but also it's his art. Like Avatar is something he's hugely passionate about, because he's now committing pretty much the rest of his professional life on making 4 more Avatar movies. So he really cares about it, and there are so many people who are just like, oh my god, another Avatar film, kill me now. People are really negative and down on the fact that he's doing it. And I don't know if I've talked about this before, maybe I'll say it here, but I really hate it when people say, I can't believe he's doing the Avatar sequels, think of all the other great films he could have made instead. And I just think, fuck you. Like, he's earned the right at this point to do whatever the fuck he wants. And, you can say, yeah, I wish he'd done this, he'd done that. I wish he'd done like 5 other movies in the interim. And it's just like, that it just seems so fucking entitled to me. Because it's just like, if you were to take Cameron and make him do what you want him to do, it's not really going to be a great product, because it's not what he wants to do. What he wants to do is more Avatar movies. So that's the best thing we can hope for from Cameron, is what he wants to do. Because if he wants to do it, he's going to put that extra effort in, that extra time, and spend years developing it. And that's one thing I really respect about the way that he's treated the Avatar sequels, is he didn't rush into them. Pretty soon afterwards, made all that money, and it's like, okay, going to get some sequels. And he's like, yep, we're going to do 2 sequels, but no timeline yet. We want to do something, we want to really just push the boundaries again. And so he's waited over a decade to really, there's been delayed release dates and stuff, but he waited many years for, different things to kind of line up, in terms of he wants to do a lot of motion capture underwater. We'll see how that pans out. But I have a feeling that what we're going to see in Avatar 2 is going to be a different thing entirely. I think it's going to be something special that we're not expecting. But again, that's just kind of the faith I have in him. But I just find it weird when people say, I wish he'd done this instead. And it's just like, he did do it because he didn't want to do it. So why would you want him to do something he doesn't want to do? Because the end result wouldn't be good. If he's just like a gun for hire, it's not going to be a great film, And that's what, no offense, but that's what a lot of very mediocre and forgettable blockbusters are. They're big films designed to make money, where there is a gun for hire. There is a director who's brought on just to make the movie and just make a serviceable product and make money. Cameron isn't going to do that. He's going to do exactly what he wants to do. And August 27th of 2010, they re-released Avatar in the special edition release. And this had 9 additional minutes of CGI footage from the Pandora sequences. And, that was definitely kind of a money grab, but apparently it cost, I think it would have been $9 million to do those shots. So like $1 million per minute of new additional footage. And I think that was just Cameron's way of, he wants to get a few more of those scenes in there, because they filmed so much. They cut a lot of the movie out to get it down to about 2.5 hours. So that was probably a case where it really is more about the money. I'm sure Cameron was like, well, okay, let me just get some more scenes in and make a cool... I don't know where Cameron stands on the various cuts of Avatar and which one he feels like is the best final product. And finally, on November 16th of 2010, Avatar was re-released on Blu-ray. It first came out on Blu-ray in April of 2010. It was re-released in a new 3-disc collector's edition version with the third cut of the film called the extended collector's edition version of the film. And then the theatrical cut and the special edition re-release cut also had family versions of the film, which removed some of the kind of, the mildly foul language. And then the extended collector's edition release had 16 minutes of new footage, including the 9 minutes added to the special edition version. So the extended collector's edition version then has, I guess, 7 minutes of additional footage, including the alternate opening sequence on Earth with Jake Sully and his kind of beginnings of setting off to Pandora. And we'll talk about that more in the next video when I talk about my thoughts on the film and my thoughts on the various versions. I don't have too much to say about them, but so August, they had the re-release in cinemas, and then November, the final extended super duper cut on Blu-ray. And that's the end of Avatar. So I don't even know where to go now, because I've been rambling on for so long in this video, and I can't believe it's been this long. If you are still watching this, holy shit. I want to say well done, but also, what are you doing with your life? Seriously. I can only assume and hope that you've been listening to this while doing something a lot more productive, because if anyone actually sat down and watched this as a video for this long, I feel bad, honestly. But that was my thoughts on the behind-the-scenes story, and that was the behind-the-scenes story of Avatar. At that time, the most successful film of all time, and was later toppled by Avengers Endgame 10 years later. But if you go to the old, adjusted for inflation, and if you take out the ticket prices and you look at the tickets sold, and you just look at how much it would have made in today's dollars, Gone with the Wind is still the number one at $3 billion, I believe, and Avatar is number two. Avatar still stands over Avengers Endgame when it comes to adjusted for inflation. So it's one of those things where, I don't know how much the re-release of Avatar in August of 2010 added to the accumulated, gross of the movie or anything, but either way, it was an absolute monster when it came out, and it will forever be a mystery to me. And I do wonder if history will change and the film will be reflected upon much more kindly in the future when the sequels come out, if they become acclaimed, and I hope that they do. But either way, I'm just glad that they're happening, because I love this world, and I would hate for, just negative reactions from people online with all... Well, again, Cameron would never bow to that anyway, and the fact that it made so much money is obviously a factor in the film's getting made, but also the fact that 20th Century Fox was bought by Disney over the past few years, and that was the studio he was making the sequels at. And so Disney now, I guess, have taken over Avatar, which is funny given the fact that they almost took over the film to begin with in 2006 when Fox initially passed. So we're now kind of coming back to that. And so it'll be intriguing to see how the film does for Disney. And I don't know whether they'll release it with the 20th Century Studios, sub-studio. I don't know what's really going on with that, but I'll look into that more when we talk about the timeline of the Avatar sequels in a future video. But for now, that has been James Cameron's Journey to Pandora. Holy fuck, I finally finished talking about it. But now, next time, we get to hear, or you get to hear, me talk about what I think of the film itself, my personal history with it, when I saw it when it first came out, why it's so special to me, why I love the film, and why revisiting it for this series is the most I've ever enjoyed it. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching, and I'll mercifully see you in the next one.